pregnant wife walked in on the millionaire and his mistress, she didn't say a word. Secrets have a way of finding daylight, and in the sunlit stillness of a gilded living room, a scene played out that no one would ever forget. Margaret Carmichael, carrying the growing life of her first child, stepped into her husband Vincent's opulent mansion and discovered a betrayal so startling it threatened to unravel her entire world. She was looking for comfort, for the familiar touch of the man she adored. Instead, she found him entangled in the arms of someone else, a woman whose presence shattered every illusion. Margaret had clung to, but instead of tears or rage, Margaret refused to utter a single word. Margaret Carmichael grew up in a modest home on the outskirts of Cincinnati. Long before she met Vincent, she had known what it was like to live paycheck to paycheck, to hear her parents' anxious whispers late at night about mounting bills. Survival was a constant theme in her childhood, yet somehow her spirit remained undimmed. She painted sunsets and doodled daisies in the margins of her worn notebooks. She wrote short stories about hope, about better futures, and about love that conquered adversity. When she met Vincent Carmichael at a charity gala, she attended only because her friend Elizabeth Townsend had pleaded with her. Margaret had to borrow a dress. Elizabeth was from a relatively affluent family in Cincinnati. She volunteered at numerous charitable events where she crossed paths with VIPs and the city's most prominent figures. Elizabeth had teased Margaret gently, saying, "You never know who you might meet." Margaret couldn't have guessed how profoundly that night would change her life. With no seat at one of the fancy sponsors' tables, Margaret found herself awkwardly lingering by the buffet. Vincent spotted her there, a single champagne flute in hand, wearing a borrowed navy gown that was slightly too tight around her bust. Their eyes locked across the lavish spread of delicacies, and Vincent found himself intrigued. Vincent was, at that point, a self-made millionaire, known throughout the region for transforming a small family construction business into a nationwide powerhouse called Carmichael Enterprises. He was dashing, but carried a quiet intimidation that both drew people in and kept them at arm's length. When he approached Margaret, she braced for a condescending remark or some suave line typical of the wealthy men she had encountered briefly in her life. Instead, he greeted her with a question she never saw coming. "Why do you look like you'd rather be anywhere else?" Margaret wasn't sure how to answer, but something about Vincent's direct, almost curious gaze gave her the nerve to reply with an honesty that surprised even herself. "I'm new to this," she admitted. "I don't know this world." Vincent's expression softened, a slight tilt of his lips, hinting at a genuine smile. "I wasn't always part of this world either." It was that line, that quiet sense of understanding, that sealed Margaret's impression of Vincent. She recognized he wasn't just a showy mogul. He had once known struggle. They spent the rest of the evening in deep conversation, discussing everything from youthfulness dreams to their current ambitions, disconnected from the glitzy hum of the gala. Their courtship was swift and intense. Within months, Margaret left her old life behind. She learned to navigate high society dinners and black tie events. She adapted to the hush-hush talk of corporate expansions and land acquisitions. Through it all, Vincent seemed tender, protective, and enthralled by her sincerity. For every rumor swirling around his name, Margaret had 1,000 reasons to trust him. He had that rare gift of making her feel like the center of his universe. Despite her parents' unease, her mother, Linda, constantly worried about the mismatch in backgrounds, Margaret pressed forward. She believed in the promise Vincent made the night he proposed. "No matter what storms we face, our love will be our anchor." The wedding was a spectacle that filled local society pages. Margaret's friend Elizabeth, was a radiant bridesmaid, and even her father, stricken with partial paralysis from a stroke, was able to muster enough strength to walk her down the aisle. She remembered how Vincent gazed at her in her white gown, as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world. In the early days of their marriage, Margaret often felt as though she were living in a dream. Their penthouse near downtown Cincinnati, with floor-to-ceiling windows, offered panoramic views of the city. They danced in the living room at midnight, ordered pizza to their lavish home after black tie events, and had inside jokes about the absurdities of high society living. But as Vincent's company expanded, winning construction bids in multiple states, he grew more and more absent. He would always promise that his work was for their future, for their comfort, and for the children they planned to have. Margaret told herself that was the price of success, that his devotion to his career didn't negate his devotion to her. She let that facade of unshakable trust and unwavering love become her reality. Until one fateful afternoon, everything changed. Margaret had discovered she was pregnant just a week before the incident. The moment she saw the two pink lines, a wave of exhilaration and anxiety swept over her. She couldn't wait to share this news with Vincent. She pictured his face lighting up, the unstoppable grin he always wore when he was truly happy. They had spoken often about starting a family, imagining a warm home filled with the laughter of children. Margaret had no doubts. This child would complete them. On the morning of that day, Margaret was supposed to have lunch with Elizabeth. She was excited to share her news with her best friend, especially since Elizabeth had been the one to gently encourage the relationship from the start. Yet, around 10 a.m., Margaret received a text from Elizabeth apologizing profusely, saying a work emergency had popped up. Elizabeth worked as a project manager at a local non-profit, so last-minute schedule changes weren't unusual. Glancing at the clock, Margaret realized Vincent would likely be at home or at least near their estate on the city's outskirts. He had mentioned taking a day off to handle some personal business. She decided that a personal, intimate reveal would be far sweeter than a phone call. She hopped into her car and drove toward the mansion, her heart fluttering with anticipation. As she pulled into the sweeping driveway, she noticed a sleek red convertible parked near the entrance. Odd, she thought. Vincent rarely had visitors without informing her, especially on his day off. Perhaps it was a business associate. A friend? Stepping through the front doors, Margaret realized how eerily quiet the house seemed. She felt a strange chill, despite the warm sunshine streaming through the windows. Her pulse quickened. The mansion's high ceilings echoed only her soft footsteps as she walked deeper inside. Then she heard a muffled giggle followed by a whisper. The sound drifted from the living room, usually the grand space reserved for entertaining large parties. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared whoever was there could hear it. She wondered if maybe Vincent was planning a surprise, but that didn't quite fit. She set her purse on a side table and inched closer to the living room, calling Vincent's name softly. It was then that she saw them. Vincent, her husband, the man who had promised her everything, was locked in a passionate embrace with a woman. Margaret recognized only from fleeting gossip Stephanie Lawson, a socialite with a reputation for trailing wealthy men. Stephanie's high-pitched laughter and the casual way she clung to Vincent confirmed that this was no spontaneous, regrettable moment. It looked practiced, familiar. Margaret felt her world crash in an instant. She willed herself to breathe. She clutched the doorframe for support, noticing the trembling in her hand. Every fiber of her being wanted to scream, to wail, to demand an explanation, but no words came. Her eyes caught Vincent's, and she saw pure shock etched across his face. Stephanie turned around too, a smug half-smile initially plastered on her lips that slowly dissolved into a faint smirk of guilt when she realized they had been discovered. Margaret locked eyes with Vincent, searching desperately for any sign that might invalidate what she was seeing. She wanted him to shake his head, to push Stephanie aside and say, "No, this isn't what it looks like." But he didn't. No denial came, no immediate apology, just stunned silence. In that moment, Margaret felt more alone than ever before. Clinging to her final shred of dignity, Margaret didn't scream. She didn't lunge at Stephanie. She didn't break anything or cry. She pivoted on her heel and walked out, the distant echo of Vincent calling her name fueling her heartbreak. She backed away, refusing to face him or the woman who had shattered her sense of security. She reached the car, slid into the driver's seat, and sat motionless for a moment as tears threatened. The pregnancy test in her purse felt like a 1,000-pound secret, pressing against her. Her husband, the father of the child she hadn't yet told him about, was in there with someone else, an affair so brazen it hurt to breathe. Margaret turned the key and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust in the driveway behind her. She still hadn't uttered a single word. Margaret found refuge at Elizabeth Townsend's small apartment in the heart of Cincinnati. Elizabeth lived in a cozy, art-filled space that brimmed with color and serenity. Normally just stepping inside made Margaret feel at home, but today an eerie numbness took over. Elizabeth opened the door to see Margaret's ashen face and puffy eyes. Alarmed, she quickly ushered Margaret in. Moments later, Margaret collapsed on Elizabeth's couch, sobbing in deep, anguished heaves that racked her body. She told Elizabeth everything, how she'd planned a sweet surprise for Vincent, how she walked into the mansion only to discover an unimaginable betrayal. She managed to choke out the words, "He was with Stephanie Lawson." Elizabeth's face darkened in a mixture of anger and concern. "I've heard rumors about her," Elizabeth said quietly, recalling stray gossip from events. "She's known to pursue high-profile men, but I never in a million years imagined Vincent would." Margaret wiped her tears, her voice trembling. "Neither did I." After an hour of comforting silence and cautious reassurances, Elizabeth asked Margaret the question neither wanted to confront. "Are you going to tell him about the baby?" That question stung Margaret like a fresh wound, the reason she had gone to the mansion in the first place. She stared at Elizabeth, uncertain. How could she even begin to share this joyful news with a man who had just shattered her trust? Elizabeth gently encouraged her friend. "At some point, you have to decide what you want to do about him, the marriage, everything. But the baby is innocent in all this. Vincent should know." Margaret nodded but remained quiet. The emotional turmoil she felt was overwhelming. She wasn't ready to see or speak to Vincent. She needed time to process the swirl of betrayal and confusion inside her. She decided to remain at Elizabeth's place for a few nights, ignoring the buzzing phone calls from Vincent and the many texts that went unread. During those days, Margaret replayed that horrific image in her mind over and over, Vincent's arms around Stephanie, their lips meeting without an ounce of shame. Every time the memory surfaced, she felt nauseous, and it wasn't just her pregnancy. She questioned everything. Had Vincent's kindness been a performance? Had his tenderness been sincere at all? Elizabeth did her best to distract Margaret. They ordered takeout, watched light-hearted movies. But Margaret's mind never strayed far from the heartbreak. She had so many questions, yet no answers. In her darkest moments, she told herself maybe it would be better to just vanish. Start anew somewhere else, raise her child away from the shadows of the past. But she knew she couldn't run forever. Sooner or later, she'd have to face Vincent. And then, 3 days after the incident, fate intervened in the most unexpected way. Margaret awoke at Elizabeth's apartment to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly against the nightstand. She glanced at the time, midnight. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the caller ID, Vincent Carmichael. She watched the phone vibrate until it went silent. Then, less than a minute later, it started up again. Fearing that something horrible had happened, Margaret reluctantly answered. Before she could speak, Vincent's anxious voice spilled through the line. "Margaret, please. I know I hurt you. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I need to see you. Please, let me explain." She wanted to hang up. She wanted to scream at him that there was no explanation that could possibly excuse his betrayal. But a part of her was desperate for any excuse to cling to the memory of the man she thought she had married. So she agreed, reluctantly, to meet him at a late-night diner not too far from Elizabeth's place. It was a public setting, and Margaret felt safer knowing she could leave any time. Elizabeth insisted on driving Margaret, staying close by in the event she needed to flee. When Margaret walked into the old diner, the bright fluorescent lights, checkered floors, and the faint aroma of coffee brought back a wave of nostalgia. Vincent was seated in a corner booth, dressed in casual attire, a stark contrast to his usual designer suits. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and his hair looked disheveled, as if he hadn't slept in days. He stood up anxiously when he saw Margaret. She slid into the seat across from him, folding her arms protectively around herself. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then Vincent leaned forward, voice shaking. "I'm sorry. I know I can't say it enough, but I never wanted to hurt you." Margaret's lips trembled. "Then why?" she asked, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let spill. "Why, Stephanie? How long has this been going on?" Vincent released a shaky breath. "A few months," he admitted, looking away. "But I swear I never stopped loving you. It was a stupid, selfish mistake. It started after those endless business trips. I was stressed, and she was there, offering comfort, making me feel important when I felt like I was losing control of everything else." Margaret shook her head in disbelief. "You felt like you were losing control, and you thought sleeping with someone else would fix that?" He looked pained. "I'm not proud of it. It was a terrible lapse in judgment. I don't have any real excuses. The pressure at work was mounting. The expansions were more complicated than I anticipated. Investors were breathing down my neck. And at home, I saw you adjusting less to the lifestyle. You seemed distant sometimes." Margaret nearly laughed, though it was a hollow sound devoid of humor. "Distant? Did you ever consider talking to me? Or asking how I felt, how I was coping with your constant absences? Instead, you found solace with Stephanie." Vincent's eyes were rimmed with regret. "I know. I wish I could take it back. You have to believe me. It's over between us. I ended it the moment you walked in. I want us to fix this. If you can find it in your heart to try." Margaret tried to steady her ragged breathing. She wanted to tell him about the baby, but she hesitated, an invisible weight clamping her throat. Finally, she softly managed. "I need time. I can't just pretend this never happened." Vincent nodded, tears welling up in his eyes for the first time since she'd known him. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, no matter what." They parted with more questions than answers. Margaret felt drained, her nerves frayed. In the car ride back, Elizabeth asked gently, "Did you tell him about the baby?" Margaret shook her head, staring out the window at the city lights streaking by. "I couldn't. Not yet." She was terrified that Vincent's remorse might be based on guilt or fear of scandal, not genuine love, and the baby was too precious, too fragile a piece of hope to cast into uncertainty. Over the next few weeks, Margaret avoided the mansion. She divided her time between Elizabeth's apartment and her parents' modest home, where she confided in her mother, Linda, about the pregnancy but held back the news of Vincent's infidelity. Her mother was overjoyed about the prospect of a grandchild, believing that Margaret and Vincent would soon share the happy news with the whole family. During this period, Vincent sent flowers, letters, and voicemails, promising he had severed ties with Stephanie. He insisted he would do anything Margaret needed: counseling, a vacation away from the pressure of business, or even stepping back from work to focus on their marriage. Yet Margaret still couldn't bring herself to forgive him, let alone see him regularly. One afternoon, as Margaret was quietly reading a book in Elizabeth's living room, there was a knock at the door. Elizabeth was at work, so Margaret rose to answer it. She opened the door to find a woman with a long, elegant coat and dark glasses. Margaret's heart pounded when she recognized Stephanie Lawson, the very woman who had destroyed her world. Margaret's first instinct was to slam the door, but Stephanie held up a hand. "Please, I'm not here to fight," she said quickly, removing her sunglasses to reveal tired eyes. Can I talk to you for a moment?" Against her better judgment, Margaret allowed Stephanie to enter, if only to avoid a scene in the hallway. She led her to the living room, silently cursing every second that she felt forced into this situation. Stephanie perched on the edge of Elizabeth's sofa, looking strangely vulnerable. Margaret's voice was cold. "Why are you here?" Stephanie's fingers trembled. "I know it's strange that I'm here, but I want to clear some things up. I'm not proud of what happened. I never meant for it to go this far." Margaret resisted the urge to laugh bitterly. "Really? You chased a married man, my husband, and it just got out of control?" Stephanie's cheeks flushed. "I won't pretend I'm innocent. I went after Vincent because I saw something in him: ambition, success, and I thought I could benefit from that. I was lonely too. Stupid reasons, I know, and for a while it was thrilling. But it wasn't love. Not for me, and I don't think for him either." Margaret stood rigid, arms crossed. "So you expect me to believe that you've turned a new leaf?" "No," Stephanie admitted, exhaling deeply. "But I want you to know that if I had known how deeply he truly cared for you, I might have thought twice before messing with your life. After you walked in on us, Vincent ended everything that same day. He made it clear you were the only one who mattered. He told me to stay away. For good." Margaret's expression faltered momentarily. She wasn't sure what to do with this information. "So why are you telling me this?" Stephanie swallowed hard. "Because I'm leaving. I'm moving to Chicago to live with my sister, trying to start over. But before I go, I wanted to do one decent thing and say, I'm sorry. Genuinely sorry. I know that might not mean much to you now, but I couldn't leave without saying it." A strange lump formed in Margaret's throat. She wanted to despise this woman, but seeing Stephanie tremble with regret and shame softened her anger just a fraction. She didn't know if Stephanie's words were entirely honest, or if it was just an attempt to soothe her own conscience. Still, a part of Margaret felt a glimmer of relief. Stephanie reached into her coat pocket, retrieved a small envelope, and set it on the coffee table. "This might not change anything, but it's a letter I wrote to you, explaining things my side, I guess. Take it or burn it. I just needed to try." Margaret remained silent. After a moment, Stephanie stood and walked to the door. She paused to glance back, her eyes damp. "I truly hope you and Vincent can find your way back. The man can be a fool, but he loves you." Without waiting for a response, Stephanie left. Margaret sank onto the couch, her heart pounding. She stared at the envelope as though it might burst into flames. Her hands shook as she finally picked it up, unsure whether to open it or fling it out the window. In the end, curiosity and a vestige of compassion won out. The letter was surprisingly short, describing how Stephanie's life had spiraled after losing her job. She'd latched onto wealthy men for security, believing that money equaled safety. The letter was part confession, part apology, and ended with a plea that Margaret consider Vincent's true devotion. Margaret set the letter aside, her emotions swirling. She could neither fully forgive nor condemn Stephanie. All she felt was a deep exhaustion and the faintest flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, Vincent's remorse was real. 2 days after Stephanie's visit, Margaret realized she couldn't hide the pregnancy for much longer. She was nearly 3 months along and had begun experiencing morning sickness, along with the swirl of daily anxieties that came from her complicated emotional state. So, with trembling resolve, she called Vincent and asked him to meet her at a neutral place, a quiet bench near Eden Park, overlooking the Ohio River. She arrived early in the late afternoon. The autumn sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the lawn. She took a seat on the wooden bench, pressing a hand against her gently swelling belly, as though to reassure the baby. When Vincent arrived, she could see nervous anticipation written all over his face. He joined her on the bench, leaving a respectful distance. After a beat of silence, he spoke first. "You look well, Margaret. I've been worried." She nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm coping." Vincent let out a slow breath. "Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure if you'd ever want to see me again." Margaret stared at the horizon, gathering her courage. "I have something important to tell you. Something I wanted to tell you the day I found you." Her voice faltered, and she closed her eyes briefly, fighting the wave of pain. "I'm pregnant, Vincent." The words hung in the air between them, thick with emotion. Vincent's eyes widened, and for a moment he just stared. Then, almost in slow motion, he reached for Margaret's hand. She let him take it, though her grip remained tense. "Pregnant." His voice trembled with a cautious joy laced with obvious remorse. "Margaret, I don't know what to say, except I'm so sorry. I'm sorry you had to deal with this alone, even for a day." Tears slipped down Margaret's cheeks. "I wanted to share it with you in a happy moment, but that chance is gone." Vincent's grip tightened protectively. "I know I've destroyed your trust, but you have to know that I will do anything to be a good father to our child and to try and fix what I broke. If that means therapy, or stepping away from the company, or even letting you go, if you can't bear to be with me, I'll do it." Margaret looked at him, seeing genuine tears in his eyes, his voice thick with regret. This was the man she had fallen in love with, human, flawed, but still capable of deep emotion. She felt her anger stir again, but it mingled with a sense of relief that he wasn't dismissing her or shifting blame. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," she whispered, "but I do know the baby deserves a father, and a mother who tries to make things right." Vincent nodded, blinking back tears. "Thank you for even considering it." They spoke for another hour, tentatively mapping out a plan. Margaret agreed to stay at her parents' place for a while to clear her head. Vincent offered to pay for all her medical appointments, to be there for the ultrasounds if she'd let him. He confessed again how the affair with Stephanie was the biggest mistake of his life. He would live with the regret forever, he said. Margaret's chest felt tight with conflicting emotions, but she also recognized the steps he was taking, the sincerity behind his remorse. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of lavender and orange, they parted with a fragile sense of hope. It was not the tearful reunion one might expect from a romance novel. It was raw, unsure, but still a spark of possibility. For the first time since that dreadful day, Margaret felt a sliver of relief. She was no longer alone in this burden. Over the following months, Margaret allowed Vincent to accompany her to prenatal appointments. He often arrived tense, as though expecting Margaret to rescind her invitation at any moment. But every time he saw the ultrasound monitor, heard the baby's steady heartbeat, he was overwhelmed by wonder. Tears filled his eyes at each visit, and Margaret sensed how deeply he wanted to be involved. Margaret remained at her parents' home, turning the old guest bedroom into a makeshift nursery. It wasn't what she had envisioned for her first child. She had dreamed of painting a modern nursery in their luxurious penthouse. But now, simpler surroundings felt more authentic. There was something grounding about returning to her roots, where her mother made homemade soup and her father offered gentle advice. Her mother, Linda, was overjoyed to see Vincent showing up with groceries, baby books, and thoughtful presents for Margaret. But Linda still didn't know the full story. She sensed tension, but assumed it was the typical anxiety of expectant parents. Margaret couldn't bring herself to crush her mother's illusions, so she remained silent about the infidelity. As the pregnancy progressed, Margaret allowed Vincent to attend birthing classes. Elizabeth, ever the supportive friend, often joined too, not only to support Margaret, but to add a layer of emotional protection whenever Vincent was near. Vincent made every effort to show he had changed. He cut back on his travel, personally handled the smaller projects at Carmichael Enterprises to remain in the city, and even relinquished some managerial duties to his trusted partner, Michael Harrington. Michael, an old friend of Vincent's, had co-founded the expansion projects. He once pulled Margaret aside to tell her, Vincent's different, now more focused, more humble. Whatever he did, he regrets it deeply. Michael's words provided cautious optimism to Margaret's wounded heart. Still, nights were the hardest. Alone in her childhood bedroom, Margaret would place a hand over her belly, feeling the baby's gentle kicks, and wonder if her child would grow up in a home fractured by lies. She wrestled with that question every single evening until sleep overtook her. Just when Margaret thought she could navigate a path toward forgiveness, new rumors surfaced. One morning, Elizabeth came rushing into Margaret's family home, her expression fraught with concern. "Margaret," she said breathlessly, "have you checked the tabloids today?" Margaret's heart dropped. "No, why?" Elizabeth handed over her phone. There, on the local gossip blog, was a photograph of Vincent stepping out of a downtown restaurant with an attractive woman on his arm. The headline read, "Vincent Carmichael spotted with new flame." Margaret's stomach churned. She felt an urge to throw the phone across the room. Tears of rage and betrayal threatened to spill over. Had Vincent lied yet again? Fighting the urge to panic, Margaret forced herself to read the article carefully. It claimed that an unnamed source had seen Vincent kissing the woman in question, a business associate from out of state. The article went on to rehash old gossip about him and Stephanie, painting Vincent as a serial cheater. Elizabeth lowered her voice. "I checked the timestamp. It was 2 nights ago. That's the night he told you he was working late on a proposal, right?" Margaret swallowed hard, feeling the sting of renewed betrayal. Memories of discovering him with Stephanie flashed through her mind. The sense of déjà vu was overwhelming. Could he be repeating the same mistake even now, while she was pregnant? Without hesitation, she dialed Vincent's number. He answered after a few rings, his voice calm. "Margaret?" She cut straight to the chase, ignoring the trembling in her voice. "Is there something you want to tell me?" "About 2 nights ago, because the tabloids are all over a photo of you with another woman." She heard Vincent exhale sharply. "Her name is Adriana King. She's an investor from Los Angeles. We met for dinner to discuss a potential partnership. That's all." Margaret's jaw tightened. "The article says you were seen kissing." Vincent's voice rose in frustration. "I never kissed her. I wouldn't. Margaret, I know I've lost your trust once, but please believe me. I had a business dinner with her, and when we walked out, paparazzi snapped photos. She was hugging me goodbye, probably too close, but it was nothing more than a professional meeting." Margaret's mind spun. If this had been a few months ago, she might have believed him without question. Now, uncertainty gnawed at her. She remembered how real it felt when he told her he loved her, even while carrying on an affair with Stephanie. She closed her eyes, pressing a hand to her pregnant belly. "I don't know what to believe, Vincent, but I can't keep riding this roller coaster." His voice wavered with desperation. "I understand. Let me prove it's not true. I'll ask Adriana to speak with you if needed. I'll do anything to show you I'm not lying." Margaret hesitated, torn between anger and the faint hope that maybe the tabloids were wrong. She sighed heavily. For the baby's sake, I hope you're telling the truth. Then she hung up. In the days that followed, Margaret avoided Vincent's calls, responding only with the occasional text. She had a prenatal checkup scheduled for the following week and hadn't decided whether she wanted Vincent there. In the midst of her emotional turmoil, a surprise visitor arrived at the family home, Adriana King herself. Margaret was in the middle of a yoga routine in the living room when Linda announced there was a businesswoman at the door. Adriana was tall, poised, and immaculately dressed, with a confident air that suggested she was used to commanding attention in boardrooms. She introduced herself politely, then cut to the chase. I apologize for the intrusion, Miss S. Carmichael. I came because Vincent told me about the tabloid rumors. I wanted to clear the air personally. Vincent did nothing inappropriate. The paparazzi snapped a photo at a misleading angle. I'm sure you have no reason to trust me, but I won't allow my professional reputation to be tarnished by salacious gossip. Margaret's face flushed. She was stunned by Adriana's directness, unsure whether to admire her blunt approach or be put off by it. So you came all this way just to say that? Margaret asked, attempting to keep her tone neutral. Adriana's gaze softened. I flew here for other meetings anyway, but yes, I felt it important to address this. Vincent insisted he wants to earn your trust back, and he hoped that hearing from me might help. I'm not here to meddle in your marriage. I only want to ensure our business arrangement isn't jeopardized by false rumors. Margaret assessed Adriana, trying to detect any deception, but something about the woman's sincere tone and confident demeanor reassured Margaret. Could it be that Vincent had indeed changed, and the tabloids were only stirring the pot for clicks? Tentatively, Margaret said, "Thank you. I appreciate your honesty. This is all very complicated for me." Adriana nodded. "I understand. My own parents went through a messy ordeal when I was a kid, so I know how this can feel. But if you need any further clarification, I'm here. I hope you and Vincent find a way through this. He speaks of you and the baby often, with real devotion." Margaret felt tears threaten again. After a brief moment of silence, Adriana excused herself politely, leaving Margaret feeling both relieved and emotionally drained. She realized she might have been on the verge of punishing Vincent for something he didn't do, because her heart was still raw from past betrayal. Margaret finally agreed to see Vincent at her next prenatal appointment. In the exam room, as the technician guided them through the ultrasound, Vincent held Margaret's hand and gazed at the monitor in awe. The baby's tiny limbs were clearly visible now, and they heard the rhythmic heartbeat fill the small room. When the exam ended, Vincent walked Margaret to her car. The winter air was crisp, and Margaret was wearing a warm coat to protect her slight baby bump from the cold. She noticed Vincent's gaze linger on her belly, a tender smile curving his lips. "I can't thank you enough for letting me be here," he said softly. Margaret studied his face lined with remorse, hope, and fear. "I'm still hurt, Vincent. Sometimes I replay that moment in my head, seeing you with her, and it tears me apart all over again. But the baby needs a father, and maybe there's still something between us worth saving." Vincent exhaled in relief, then nodded gravely. "I'll show you every day that I've changed. I'll give you no reason to doubt me again." They fell into a cautious rhythm over the next several weeks. Margaret allowed Vincent to help with nursery shopping, painting the walls a soft, neutral shade and discussing baby names. Some nights, he would come over to her parents' house and cook dinner with Linda. He even accompanied her father on walks around the block, listening to old stories about Margaret's childhood. Slowly, Margaret began to see genuine transformation in Vincent. He had put aside his once ceaseless drive for expansion, focusing more on local community projects that allowed him to stay close to home. He even took the time to help Elizabeth's non-profit cause, quietly donating funds and participating in a volunteer day, much to Elizabeth's surprise. Margaret wasn't naive. She knew rebuilding trust was a long journey. But as her belly grew, so did her cautious optimism. The baby kicked, reminding her there was new life in the mix, an innocent life deserving of stability and love. Just when it seemed everything was on a path to healing, another unforeseen twist emerged. Late one evening, Margaret's phone rang. It was Stephanie Lawson. Margaret hadn't heard from her since the day she came to Elizabeth's apartment to apologize. She almost let the call go to voicemail, but felt a sinking dread that urged her to answer. Stephanie's voice was strained, barely above a whisper. "Margaret, I'm calling from Chicago. I need to warn you about something." Margaret's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Stephanie took a shaky breath. "Someone's trying to sabotage Vincent. I overheard a conversation in a lounge here, people mentioning how they plan to spread rumors about him as a cheater and a financial fraud. I don't have all the details, but I recognize the name someone from Carmichael Enterprises. I think they want to push Vincent out of the company." Margaret's heart pounded. She recalled the tabloid rumors about Adriana King. Could that have been part of a bigger plot? "Who was it?" "I'm not entirely sure," Stephanie said regretfully. "I just heard them reference a man named Carter or something like that. They were discussing forging documents and planting them to ruin Vincent's reputation. I overheard them say they wanted to exploit the tension in his marriage too. They think he's distracted. They want to dethrone him as CEO. Margaret felt her blood run cold. Carter. The only Carter she knew was Anthony Carter, one of Vincent's top investors who had a long history of butting heads with Vincent's decisions. Could he have orchestrated this? Stephanie whispered a final plea. "Margaret, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I couldn't stay silent. If you need me to testify to what I heard, I'll do it. I owe you that much." Margaret hesitated, her mind racing. "Thank you," she murmured, unsure what else to say. When the call ended, she stood there, stunned. Was Vincent in danger of losing everything, just as he was trying to rebuild his life with her? She immediately called Vincent, breathless as she relayed what Stephanie had said. Instead of dismissing it, Vincent paused for a moment, and then she heard him say, "I believe it. Anthony Carter's been pressuring me about expansions I refuse to authorize. He wants me out." I knew he was cunning, but this is next-level treachery. Margaret's hands shook. "What do we do?" Vincent's voice was firm but calm. "I handle it. I'll gather my legal team. If Carter wants a fight, he'll get one. But I won't let this overshadow us. Not again." In the storm that followed, Margaret and Vincent found themselves unexpectedly united. As the false rumors about Vincent's mismanagement spread in the business world, the Carmichaels stood shoulder to shoulder. Margaret, who had once considered leaving Vincent entirely, chose to believe in his sincerity and defend his reputation against malicious gossip. They gathered evidence, email exchanges, eyewitness testimonies, and corporate documents to prove that Anthony Carter was orchestrating a smear campaign. Michael Harrington played a vital role, stepping in to ensure the company's board understood what was really happening. Elizabeth Townsend assisted by tapping her network of colleagues who had experience dealing with unscrupulous investors. In the midst of chaos, Margaret saw Vincent's character shine. He refused to retaliate with dirty tactics, opting instead for due process. She realized that while he had made a grave mistake in his personal life, his commitment to integrity in business was unyielding. That conviction reminded her of the man she fell in love with, the one who started from nothing and built a company on the backbone of hard work and honesty. During this time, they spent countless late nights together, discussing legal strategies and preparing documents. Margaret would doze off in the living room of her parents' home, only to wake and find Vincent covering her with a blanket, a gentle look in his eyes. The baby's imminent arrival offered a bright spot in the turmoil, reminding them both of what truly mattered. Eventually, Vincent's legal team unearthed damning evidence against Anthony Carter, forged documents, manipulated financial records, and text messages outlining plans to smear Vincent's personal life. Faced with potential criminal charges, Carter resigned from Carmichael Enterprises under a cloak of disgrace and promptly fled the public eye. Though the scandal had nearly torn the company apart, its unexpected silver lining was how it ultimately drew Margaret and Vincent closer. Their shared struggle to protect Vincent's reputation and the future of Carmichael Enterprises rekindled the partnership they had almost lost. Late nights, once spent brooding or accusing, were now dedicated to brainstorming with lawyers, talking through contingency plans, and supporting each other in the ways a married team should. Even Elizabeth, initially suspicious of Vincent's reformed behavior, found herself impressed by his steadfast commitment as he battled to clear his name without resorting to underhanded tactics. Margaret couldn't help reflecting on how differently Vincent handled adversity now compared to the man who once folded under pressure and betrayed her trust. While she was still learning to forgive, she saw tangible evidence of his change in how he carried himself: less ego, more patience, and a deeper understanding of what he stood to lose if he repeated his old mistakes. Observing him meticulously gather proof against Carter, consult with Michael Harrington, and keep lines of communication open with her throughout the process, Margaret recognized the resolute side of Vincent that had once made her believe in him so fervently. Yet, even as the threat to Vincent's career began to dissolve, a brand new challenge waited on the horizon: the imminent birth of their child. Margaret's pregnancy was nearing its final stages, and every passing day brought a mixture of excitement, nerves, and an undercurrent of fear. She knew the heartbreak she had endured might resurface if the labor proved complicated, or if old wounds flared up in moments of stress. She prepared herself by reading every book she could find on childbirth and infant care, and Vincent surprised her by doing the same. They spoke quietly about baby names late into the night, took meticulous notes during birthing classes, and even discussed the kind of parents they wished to be: calm, consistent, and there for their child in a way that overcame any shadows of the past. On a crisp spring morning, a faint haze of sunlight filtered through the gauzy curtains of the guest bedroom at Margaret's parents' home. She woke with an ache in her lower back, a twinge that felt different from the usual discomfort of late pregnancy. It persisted, and by mid-morning, the pains had grown stronger and more regular. Linda, her mother, hovered anxiously, insisting Margaret should call Vincent immediately. When Margaret reluctantly dialed his number, Vincent picked up on the second ring. His voice, though measured, betrayed an undercurrent of excitement and worry. "Let's go to the hospital right now," he said, already halfway out the door of his office at Carmichael Enterprises. Margaret's father, though partially immobilized by his stroke, insisted on joining them. He recalled how hard he had fought to walk her down the aisle on her wedding day, and he refused to miss this milestone. So Linda helped him into a wheelchair, and with Elizabeth at the wheel of Margaret's car, they hurried through the streets of Cincinnati until they finally reached the hospital. The maternity ward bustled with activity, bright fluorescent lights reflecting off polished floors. A kind nurse ushered Margaret and Vincent into a private birthing suite where monitors and medical equipment surrounded a single bed. Elizabeth and Linda lingered outside for a moment, waiting for instructions. Vincent stayed glued to Margaret's side, clasping her hand as she breathed through the early contractions. Despite all they'd been through, there was an unspoken tenderness between them, a mutual promise that they would face whatever came next as a team. As the hours passed and the contractions intensified, Margaret's resolve wavered under the onslaught of pain and fatigue. Several times she felt tears pricking at her eyes, not solely from physical discomfort, but from the sheer emotional weight of the moment. She was about to bring a new life into a world where she and Vincent had once nearly lost each other. Whenever her strength ebbed, Vincent whispered words of encouragement, pressing cool cloths to her forehead and reminding her of the precious child that awaited them both. Even Linda, typically calm, showed her nerves. She paced the hallway, shooting worried glances through the door. Occasionally, Elizabeth would crack the door open to offer an update on Margaret's progress, then close it softly so the mother-to-be could concentrate. Near midnight, the nurse announced Margaret was fully dilated. A sudden flurry of activity erupted. Doctors and additional nurses entered, adjusting the bed and checking equipment. In those moments, fear and hope collided. Margaret's entire body trembled as the medical staff guided her to push with each contraction, counting steadily. Vincent braced her shoulders, whispering in her ear that she was doing great, that they were almost there. The nurse called out encouragement, her voice cutting through Margaret's labored breathing. At last, after what felt like an eternity, a piercing cry filled the room. The doctor lifted a tiny, wriggling form and placed her on Margaret's chest. Warm tears streaked Margaret's cheeks as she looked into her daughter's red, squalling face. She caught a glimpse of Vincent beside her, tears sliding freely down his own cheeks. His lips parted in awe. "She's here," he managed, voice thick with emotion. "Ah, Sophia Grace." Margaret's heart overflowed with love so immense it was almost painful. She let the baby's tiny fingers grip her own, breath catching at the miracle of it all. This moment, raw, messy, and utterly beautiful, felt like the sum of everything that had led them to rebuild their lives, to cling to hope despite every betrayal and heartbreak. Once Sophia was gently cleaned, weighed, and wrapped in a soft blanket, Vincent held her for the first time. The sight of him cradling their daughter, still wearing the same determined expression he'd had when fighting for his family's honor, moved Margaret more than words could say. In that instant, they locked eyes, forging a silent understanding that this was the promise they were meant to fulfill all along. When Linda and Margaret's father finally came in to meet Sophia, there wasn't a dry eye among them. Even Elizabeth, who prided herself on her practical nature, wiped at misty eyes as she leaned over the hospital bed to gaze at the newborn. Margaret's father, from his wheelchair, extended a shaking hand to stroke Sophia's silky hair, while Linda smiled so brightly it lit up the entire room. "You did it," Linda whispered to Margaret, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You brought her into the world, and look at how perfect she is." Margaret felt exhausted to her core, yet indescribably elated. Nothing, not the swirl of allegations against Vincent, not the betrayal that had once shattered her faith, could overshadow this moment. The new life cradled in her arms was a promise of a fresh start. By the time the nurses had settled her into a recovery room, Margaret was already drifting on the edge of sleep. She glanced over at Vincent, who refused to leave, even at the nurse's gentle nudging that he should rest. He only had eyes for Sophia, as if mesmerized by every breath she took. The same man who once stood at the apex of wealth and achievement, only to risk it all for a careless fling, now looked humbled beyond measure by the most precious gift he could ever receive. Later that night, as the hospital grew quiet, Vincent leaned close to Margaret, their hands resting atop the soft swaddle blanketing Sophia. "I promise you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion, "I'll spend every day proving that you and our daughter are my world." Margaret's eyes fluttered open to meet his. The memory of Stephanie, of that terrible moment in their living room, flickered at the edge of her consciousness. But here, in this room warmed by the presence of their newborn daughter, a different memory took precedence, a memory of second chances, of forgiveness earned, not simply granted. She touched Vincent's face lightly. "I believe you," she answered, and the words carried a weight she had hesitated to give him before. And with that quiet statement, they embarked on the next chapter of their life, determined to honor the fragile miracle resting in their arms, who had already taught them more about love and redemption than any trial they had endured so far. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after Sophia's birth. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. Margaret still had moments when doubt and hurt rose to the surface. Vincent had his own demons to conquer, guilt that would resurface whenever he caught a certain look in Margaret's eyes. But day by day, they learned to communicate more openly. They attended couples therapy, where Margaret finally released the pent-up anger she had carried since the day she found Vincent with Stephanie. Vincent listened without defensiveness, acknowledging the pain he had caused. Gradually, real healing began. Carmichael Enterprises weathered the storm and emerged stronger. Vincent restructured the leadership to prevent any one person from wielding too much power. He consulted Margaret for advice on charitable initiatives, wanting her compassion and insight to guide the company's community outreach programs. They moved back into the penthouse eventually, but only after making sure Margaret felt safe, secure and ready to embrace that space again. Sometimes, late at night, when Sophia was asleep in her nursery, Margaret would sit on the balcony with Vincent, sipping tea and gazing over the city skyline. Silence lingered, but it was no longer a painful silence. It was a comfortable understanding, a testament to the words that once went unsaid. They had endured betrayal, heartbreak, and scandal, and somehow they emerged not unscathed, but wiser, stronger, and more deeply bound than ever. In those quiet moments, Margaret remembered the day she had walked in on Vincent and Stephanie, the day her world collapsed. She hadn't said a word then, partly because the pain had been indescribable. Now, she realized the silence also signified a strength within her, the ability to withhold final judgment until every truth could be uncovered. That silent resilience led them both to a place of deeper honesty and genuine reconciliation. And so their story continues, a tapestry of heartbreak, woven through with threads of forgiveness and love, for the sake of a child and the hope of a better tomorrow. Thank you for joining us on this riveting journey through love, betrayal, heartbreak, and redemption. In Pregnant Wife walked in on the millionaire and his mistress. She didn't say a word. We witnessed how a single moment of discovered betrayal could unravel dreams and shatter trust in an instant. Yet through heartbreak, revelations, and steadfast determination, Margaret and Vincent found a fragile path toward healing. Their courage to face life's shadows together reminds us that forgiveness is never a sign of weakness, but a testament to enduring hope. Millionaire promised the world to his mistress, but forgot his pregnant wife's birthday. Meet Alexander Van Doren, a self-made millionaire, so used to getting everything he wants that he's forgotten how much it costs others. His life is a tapestry of luxurious galas, glittering diamonds, and secret rendezvous. But beneath the polished veneer, he's about to discover that a man who can buy the world might lose what truly matters most. Driven by obsession, he dares to promise the world to his radiant mistress, all while ignoring the quiet heartbreak of his pregnant wife. When a forgotten birthday sets off a chain of cataclysmic events, Alexander's world careens toward disaster. Secrets will unravel, loyalties will shatter, and no amount of money can save him now. Alexander Van Doren was, by all appearances, the perfect portrait of success. He was lean, tall, and strikingly handsome, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to pierce through whoever stood before him. His family name carried weight, but his true fortune was self-made, a sprawling real estate empire built upon a single risky investment he'd made at just 24 years old. By 30, he had multiplied that fortune 100-fold. Now, at 36, he was poised to double it yet again. He lived in the affluent enclave of Westbridge Hills, where gated mansions lined the streets like jewels in a crown. Neighbors spoke his name in hushed tones, a mix of envy and admiration. He had everything he wanted, or so it seemed. The truth was, in the silent corners of his life, dissatisfaction brewed like a storm. Alexander craved excitement, an addiction to adrenaline, and the thrill of conquering every obstacle. His wife, Catherine Van Doren, was the epitome of dignity and grace. Once an aspiring poet, she had traded her ambitions for the life of a corporate wife, attending charity events and nodding dutifully by her husband's side. Despite her own silent yearnings, Catherine held steadfastly to love and loyalty. She was 9 months pregnant with their first child, her belly a gentle curve that symbolized a long, cherished dream, but the glow that once marked her features had dimmed in recent months, replaced by worry lines carved from loneliness and suspicion. The tension in the mansion was palpable. Lately, Alexander had seemed preoccupied, spending many nights in his study or at business meetings. Catherine had begun to wonder, had she done something wrong? Was the pregnancy too much for him? Or perhaps there was someone else occupying that space in his heart. She tried to dismiss the thought, but women's intuition rarely lies dormant for long. Then came an innocent hint of reality that Catherine couldn't ignore. One night, while searching for her car keys, she found a receipt for an extremely expensive bracelet in Alexander's jacket pocket. Engraved on it was a message that read, "For my shining star, AV." Now, Catherine's name had no V in it, and though the initials matched her husband, the note looked suspiciously intimate. Panic churned inside her, but she told herself it could be for business, perhaps a thank you gift for an investor or something along those lines. Yet the seed of doubt took root. In the days that followed, Catherine became more observant. She noticed Alexander's phone lighting up late at night with texts from someone named AP. She noticed the hush in his voice whenever he answered these calls. She felt the distance, colder than any winter frost, growing between them. But still, she tried to hope, to believe that once the baby arrived, everything would fall back into place. Little did she know that delicate facade of normalcy was on the brink of shattering, sending the Van Doren household into turmoil from which it might never recover. Anastasia Pierce was Alexander's secret, a secret that roared like a wildfire beneath the surface of his otherwise controlled existence. She was a striking woman with raven hair and emerald green eyes that seemed to sparkle with mischievous curiosity. In many ways, she was the polar opposite of Catherine, yet she carried a certain allure that Alexander found irresistible. They'd met 6 months ago at a fundraising gala for the Westbridge Hills Arts Council, a place Alexander had attended more out of obligation than genuine interest. Yet upon spotting Anastasia across the room, her laughter echoing, her slender figure accentuated by a simple but elegant black dress, he'd felt a spark he could not ignore. Their first encounter was innocent enough. She'd merely introduced herself, praising his charitable contributions to local youth art programs. One drink led to another, and conversation flowed like a well-aged wine. Soon they were meeting under hushed arrangements at an upscale lounge downtown, away from the prying eyes of Westbridge Hills. They told themselves it was just a harmless flirtation, but lines blurred quickly. Anastasia was no naive college girl enamored by wealth. She was a sophisticated woman who had carved a path in the art world, curating exhibitions and traveling extensively. She was used to attention and men with money. Yet something about Alexander tugged at her heartstrings more intensely than she'd anticipated. Perhaps it was the subtle vulnerability lurking behind his confident exterior, or maybe it was his magnetic aura of possibility. He made lavish promises, whispered in her ear about a future filled with travel, romance, and a place of her own in his heart. She believed, or at least wanted to believe, that these promises were real. But as the months unfolded, Anastasia found herself catching glimpses of Alexander's deeper complexities, his restlessness, his unspoken burdens, and the ring that still glinted on his left hand whenever he forgot to take it off in her presence. She often wondered about Catherine, but Alexander's dismissals were always the same. It's complicated. She doesn't understand me like you do, or we're practically living separate lives now. He insisted a divorce was on the horizon, painting an image of a marriage that was more a business arrangement than a union of hearts. Stolen weekends in Montauk, secret lunches in hidden bistros, midnight phone calls brimming with passion. It was easy for Anastasia to lose herself in the fantasy. She craved the adrenaline too, thriving on the illicit thrill, but deep down, she yearned for stability. She wanted to be more than just a hidden mistress. She believed Alexander when he promised that soon it would just be the two of them. Now, with Catherine's pregnancy nearing its final weeks, the pressure mounted. Alexander was starting to show signs of agitation. He was jumpy, glancing at his phone every few minutes, always on alert. Anastasia felt the simmer of urgency in their conversations, as if a storm was about to break, yet she held fast to the illusions he'd spun around her. After all, he was Alexander Van Doren, the brilliant millionaire who had never failed in any venture. If anyone could make impossible dreams come true, it had to be him. What she didn't know was that behind the bravado, Alexander was dancing on thin ice, and every step threatened to plunge them all into the freezing darkness beneath. Back at the Van Doren mansion, the tension thickened with every passing day. Catherine's due date edged closer, and with it came a surge of emotional fragility. She found herself fending off swirling anxieties about motherhood, about her marriage, and about the unspeakable secret she feared might be unfolding before her very eyes. She tried to confront Alexander at dinner one night, choosing her words carefully, desperate for reassurance. "Alex," she began softly, tracing the rim of her glass of water, "I feel like we're drifting. Is something on your mind?" He looked up from his phone, seemingly startled. "What makes you say that?" "I've just been busy at work. You know how it is," he replied, offering the faintest of smiles. His eyes, however, revealed no warmth. Catherine pressed on, uncertain if she should mention the bracelet receipt or the mysterious late-night texts. But she stopped short, her heart hammered, fearing that speaking the words aloud would make them irrevocably real. She settled instead for a whispered question. "Don't you think we should spend more time together before the baby arrives? Maybe a short trip, just us?" Alexander grimaced slightly. The very thought of stepping away from his swirling entanglements, business deals, his affair, seemed like a burden. "We'll have time," he said tersely, returning his attention to his phone as if the conversation had already ended. That night, Catherine wept silently in bed while Alexander dozed off in his office, lulled by spreadsheets and clandestine messages from Anastasia. The future that once promised warmth and familial bliss was turning cold. If only Catherine had known how complicated things were behind the scenes. Days later, an ominous cloud settled over Westbridge Hills, literally and figuratively. A slow-moving storm churned in the Atlantic, threatening to drench the coastline in torrential rain. The local news couldn't stop warning about flash floods and hurricane-force winds. Yet the warnings did little to shift the course of the emotional storm taking shape within the Van Doren circle. For while Catherine was preparing for a baby, Anastasia was preparing to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. She'd grown restless with Alexander's excuses. Why did he refuse to make their relationship public? Why did he keep delaying the big talk about leaving Catherine? The frustration swelled into resentment, and resentment gave birth to bold decisions. Late one evening, she texted Alexander, "Anastasia, we need to talk, face to face. I want answers." But answers were not something Alexander was prepared to give just yet. His business deals were teetering on critical negotiations. A lucrative land development near Charleston was about to net him tens of millions. He needed to maintain focus, to keep his composure. He responded curtly, "Alexander, soon, my star. I promise. Just need to wrap up a few things." Anastasia read the message and felt a swirl of conflicting emotions: hope, anger, longing. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being strung along. Perhaps it was time to make Alexander see that she wasn't a mere accessory. Maybe she should make a bold appearance at the Van Doren mansion or confront him at his office. But would that risk losing him entirely? Fear and determination wrestled in her mind. Meanwhile, Catherine found herself alone in the mansion more often. She tried to distract herself by tidying the nursery, a serene space painted in soft green, with a crib made from the finest wood. But emptiness lingered in every corner of that grand house. She quietly decided that if Alexander wouldn't share his burdens with her, she'd uncover the truth on her own. Little did any of them realize that the approaching literal storm was merely a harbinger of the chaos and heartbreak that awaited. Catherine's birthday arrived on a day marked by incessant rainfall. Wind whipped the trees in the Van Doren estate's expansive garden, scattering leaves across the marble driveway. The storm had intensified overnight, and the weather mirrored Catherine's inner turmoil. She'd never been one to demand grand gestures or expensive gifts. A simple, heartfelt acknowledgement would have sufficed. In years past, Alexander would lavish her with roses, jewelry, or romantic dinners in five-star restaurants. They would dance, laugh, and talk about their shared dreams. Yet this year, as the sun struggled to break through the storm clouds, there was no sign of Alexander. Not even a text message. Catherine rose early, heart fluttering with a faint optimism. Perhaps he planned a surprise? She had to allow him that benefit of the doubt. She showered, dressed in a loose, comfortable sweater that stretched over her pregnant belly, and tiptoed downstairs. The house was silent, echoing her hopes back to her in empty hushes. By mid-morning, her phone remained quiet. No calls, no texts, just the relentless pounding of the rain on the windows. She sipped tea alone in the spacious living room, trying not to let her tears overflow. The day dragged on, each hour a cruel reminder that the man she loved was too lost in his own world to remember something as simple as her birthday. And where was Alexander? He was in an upscale penthouse suite downtown, far from the prying eyes of Westbridge Hills. A last-minute business conference call had turned into a celebratory lunch with potential investors. And that lunch turned into an impromptu dinner. Throughout it all, he was accompanied by Anastasia. She'd demanded a face-to-face meeting to discuss their future, and Alexander, hoping to placate her, invited her to the city under the guise of business. In the plush intimacy of that penthouse, they shared whispered confidences and sipped champagne. Anastasia prodded him about the timeline for his divorce, pressing harder than she ever had before. Her green eyes burned with resolve. "You keep saying you'll leave Catherine. You said you'd do it before the baby arrived, so we could start our life. But time's running out, Alexander." He swallowed hard, scanning the room as if searching for an exit. "Things are complicated, Anna." "You know that," he said, employing the gentle tone he used whenever he tried to calm her. "Once this business deal closes, I'll make the final move, I promise." Thunder rumbled in the distance, lightning splitting the sky. A flicker of guilt surfaced in Alexander's eyes, but he quickly suppressed it. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, but he ignored it. He was too ensnared by Anastasia's allure, too intoxicated by the escape she provided. He never once glanced at the date or realized its importance. Even as night fell, Catherine's phone remained silent of any birthday wishes from her husband. Alone in a darkened living room, the storm raging outside her windows, she made a promise to herself after the baby was born. She would confront Alexander directly. No more doubts or uncertainties. She wanted the truth, whether it shattered her heart or not. For Alexander, this single oversight for getting his pregnant wife's birthday would prove to be the first domino in a cascade of devastating consequences. The morning after Catherine's forgotten birthday, the storm had finally abated, but the atmosphere within the Van Doren mansion remained suffused with tension. Catherine woke up feeling numb. She hadn't slept well. Every time she closed her eyes, memories of happier birthdays flooded her consciousness. She remembered how Alexander once surprised her with a hot air balloon ride, how he serenaded her on a whim. Now, that seemed like another lifetime. She mustered the courage to confront him, but found the master bedroom empty. In his usual spot on the nightstand, Alexander's phone was missing. So was he. Instead, she found a terse note, had an early meeting. Don't wait up. The words stung like a slap to the face. Her birthday gone, unacknowledged. She wondered if he even remembered now. By noon, Catherine decided she could no longer ignore her suspicions. She needed proof, solid evidence of Alexander's infidelity. Gathering her resolve, she went to his home office. It was a spacious room, lined with dark wooden shelves and encyclopedias of business strategies, with a large mahogany desk dominating the center. In that desk was a locked drawer. She'd seen him open a few times, always discreetly. Her heart pounded as she rifled through his keys until she found the small one that fit. The drawer clicked open to reveal a stack of documents. Nestled among them was a small black journal with handwritten notes and receipts tucked into the pages. She flipped through quickly, eyes widening at what she saw, travel itineraries to luxury hotels. She had never stayed in with him. Designer shopping receipts for items far too intimate to be for business associates. And pictures. Selfies he'd taken with Anastasia in fancy restaurants, at art exhibits, and once on a yacht, each one capturing their secret world. Catherine's breath caught in her throat as she studied the woman in the photos. Anastasia was stunning everything. Catherine had once been, perhaps. But it wasn't just jealousy that roiled in Catherine's gut. It was betrayal, heartbreak, and a fierce determination. She now had confirmation of her husband's double life. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Footsteps in the hallway jolted her, and she hastily shoved everything back into the drawer, locking it. She could barely compose herself when Alexander walked in, a troubled expression on his face. "Kath, what are you doing in here?" he asked, noticing her tremor. She closed her eyes, took a shaky breath, and turned to face him. For a moment, neither spoke. Catherine was torn between accusing him outright and preserving the little dignity she had left. In the end, she said, "We need to talk," her voice steadied by an undercurrent of rage and heartbreak. Alexander looked uneasy. "Yes, we do, but maybe later. I have important calls." "Important calls?" she echoed, her voice edged with anger. "What about my birthday, Alexander? Or does that not matter anymore?" He seemed genuinely startled, a flash of realization crossing his face. "Catherine, I'm sorry. It slipped my mind with all the chaos at work. She held up a hand, cutting him off. Just don't. "We'll talk tonight," she said, her voice quivering with hurt, but also steeled by knowledge. With that, she brushed past him, leaving Alexander to grapple with the first stirrings of real guilt. What neither of them could predict was just how explosive that evening's conversation would be and how its repercussions would extend far beyond the walls of their mansion. Night descended on Westbridge Hills with a certain heaviness, as if the air itself braced for an impending confrontation. Catherine spent the day locked in a mental tug-of-war. Her heart wept for the marriage she once had, Yet her mind screamed for answers, resolution, no matter how painful it might be. By the time Alexander returned home, she was waiting in the living room, perched on the edge of the couch like a sentinel. The room was awash in the dim glow of a single lamp, casting dramatic shadows on the walls. Catherine's expression was resolute, her posture poised. "We talk now," she said firmly the moment he stepped inside. Alexander set down his briefcase and loosened his tie, looking as though he'd rather be anywhere else. But there was no escaping. Not this time. Catherine wasted no time. She retrieved the stack of incriminating documents and photographs from the desk drawer, laying them out on the coffee table like evidence in a courtroom. "Do you want to explain these?" she asked, her voice heartbreakingly calm. Alexander froze, color draining from his face. He glanced at the images of him and Anastasia, the receipts, the notes scrawled in the little black journal. Lies dangled on the tip of his tongue, but he could no longer pretend. "Catherine, who is she?" Catherine's voice cracked, just enough to reveal her underlying pain. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "Her name is Anastasia Pierce. We met some months ago." It was never supposed to go this far. Catherine's eyes glistened with tears she fought to hold back. "But it did. And you chose her over your own wife, your pregnant wife. Why, Alexander?" She waited, but no meaningful excuse came. "Have you even considered the stress you're putting on me, on our child?" Alexander pinched the bridge of his nose, shame mingling with frustration. "Catherine, I'm sorry. My life. It felt like it was missing something. I couldn't control it. Everything just spiraled. Missing something," Catherine repeated, her voice choked with emotion. "We built a life together, and I'm carrying your child. And you say you're missing something?" He had no answer that would satisfy her. The room reverberated with silence until Catherine finally spoke again. "You need to decide, Alexander. I'm not going to share you with anyone. If you want this marriage, if you want to be a father, you have to cut her out of your life. Completely." Alexander stared at the floor, weighed down by 1,000 unspoken fears. He thought of Anastasia's piercing green eyes, her effervescent laughter, the sense of forbidden freedom she awakened in him. But he also thought of Catherine's steady heart, her unwavering love, and the unborn child he had a duty to protect. The decision was monstrous, yet also straightforward. Family or mistress? "I need time," he whispered finally, afraid to look Catherine in the eye. "You have until tomorrow," she said, not unkindly. "Otherwise, I'll do what I have to do for myself and for this baby." Alexander nodded, the gravity of her words crashing over him. He turned away, unable to face the devastation etched on her features. As he climbed the grand staircase to their bedroom, he felt as though each step carried him closer to a decision that would reshape his life forever. But fate, as it often does, had other, more dramatic plans in store. Anastasia Pierce had reached her breaking point. The night before, she and Alexander had exchanged tense text messages. His vague reassurances did little to calm her growing apprehension. A new fear clutched at her heart. What if Alexander never truly intended to leave Catherine? What if all his promises were just a mirage, dangling before her to keep her interested while he juggled a double life? In a moment of reckless determination, Anastasia decided to force Alexander's hand. She dressed in a tailored navy trench coat, stepping out into the drizzly morning air, and hailed a taxi to Westbridge Hills. The journey felt eternal. Nervous energy sparked in her chest as the suburban scenery glided by a realm of manicured lawns and million-dollar estates. So quiet, it was almost unnerving. She clutched her phone, ignoring a series of missed calls from Alexander. Let him worry, she thought grimly. Arriving at the Van Doren mansion, she stepped out onto the gravel driveway, her heels crunching ominously. The mansion loomed before her, a testament to the wealth and power that Alexander commanded. If he truly wanted a life with her, he had to be honest. She squared her shoulders and marched to the front door, ringing the bell with a steely determination. It was Catherine who opened it. The two women locked eyes for a moment. Catherine, heavily pregnant, was taken aback by the visitor's striking beauty and unwavering stare. Recognition dawned on her face. She'd seen that face in the photos. Instantly, her heart pounded like a war drum. Anastasia Pierce, the woman, introduced herself, barely managing the politeness to offer a tight, thin-lipped smile. "I'm here to see Alexander." Catherine inhaled a trembling breath. So this was the woman who had disrupted her life. Anger roiled beneath her outward composure. "Alexander isn't home," Catherine said icily, stepping aside to block any attempt of entry. "Then I'll wait," Anastasia replied, her voice resolute. She took a daring step forward, as if challenging Catherine to stop her. The tension in the foyer was suffocating. Catherine's fists clenched involuntarily. "You have no right to be here," she hissed. "You've already caused enough harm." Anastasia met her gaze, anger flaring in her emerald eyes. "Listen, Catherine," she said, her tone unyielding. "I know this is painful, but I'm not the only one responsible. Alexander led me on. He promised me." Catherine cut her off, voice quavering with a mix of rage and despair. "Promised you what? A life together? A future? And what about my future? Our child's future?" In that moment, both women realized how intricately their fates had become entwined by one man's lies. The confrontation escalated into a chaotic exchange of accusations and heartbreak, culminating in a stark ultimatum from Anastasia: "If Alexander doesn't choose me, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man he really is." Before Catherine could respond, headlights swept over the driveway as Alexander's car pulled in. He stepped out, shock painted all over his face at the sight of the two women. His mistress and his wife both pregnant, with questions, accusations, demands stood mere feet apart, and he was the linchpin in this entire, spiraling disaster. Little did Alexander realize the damage was already done, and that destiny had yet another cruel twist waiting around the corner. The wind picked up again as storm clouds gathered above Westbridge Hills, painting the sky a deep grey. Alexander hurried to the front steps, his heart pounding from the moment he recognized Anastasia's sleek figure standing face to face with Catherine. "Alexander," Anastasia said stiffly, hands balled at her sides. Her eyes flicked to Catherine's pregnant belly, then back to him. "We need to talk." "Inside," Catherine added, her voice cold. "Now." Alexander could scarcely breathe under the weight of their combined fury. He led them to the living room, a space usually reserved for elegant gatherings and polite conversation. Today, it felt like the stage for a tragic showdown. The air crackled with tension as they stood in a triangle, Catherine by the grand piano, Anastasia near the fireplace, and Alexander between them, his expression etched with desperation. He turned to Anastasia first. "What are you doing here? This is my home. You can't just—" She cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't you dare scold me. You've been avoiding me, dodging my questions. You promised me a life, a future. I deserve an explanation." Catherine's gaze was laser-focused on Alexander. "So it's true. She came to stake her claim in our home, Alexander." Her voice trembled with unmasked hurt. "Did you even think about what this would do to me? To your child?" Alexander's head swiveled from one to the other, panic shining in his eyes. "Catherine, Anastasia, this got out of control. I never wanted to hurt either of you. Yet here we are." Anastasia fired back. "Stop pretending you're some helpless bystander. You orchestrated this. You promised me a fresh start, and now you're looking at me like I'm a stranger." Silence smothered the room. Catherine found her breath uneven, anxiety pressing down on her like a vise. She spoke slowly, trying to maintain composure. "You told me last night you needed time. Well, time's up. Choose now, Alexander. Tell her to leave and cut ties for good, or we're done." The ultimatum hung in the air, a loaded gun aimed at the fragile life he'd built. Alexander looked at Anastasia, whose jaw was set in defiance. Then he turned to Catherine, her eyes dark with betrayal, one hand protectively resting on her belly. A swirl of images raced through his mind. The vow he'd taken with Catherine, the child that was mere weeks away from coming into the world, the nights of stolen passion with Anastasia, the promises he'd made in whispered hushes. His throat felt dry as desert sand. He paused, swallowed. I choose Catherine. This is my family. I can't abandon my wife and our baby. Anastasia recoiled as though slapped. You're making a mistake, she said, voice shaking. You told me you were unhappy, that you wanted out. Alexander closed his eyes. Maybe I said things in the heat of the moment, but it's over. We're done, Anastasia. Tears welled in Anastasia's eyes. Part of her had expected this answer, but hearing it aloud shattered her illusions. She shot Catherine a look that was equal parts fury and sorrow. You think you've won? She said in a voice strangled by heartbreak. He'll do it again. Men like Alexander never change. With that, she spun on her heel and headed for the door, leaving Alexander and Catherine in the hush of aftermath. But even as the door slammed shut, Catherine could not find relief. Instead, a deep, unsettling dread settled in her chest. Something in Anastasia's parting words, in her aura of steely resolve, warned that this was far from over. In the days that followed, Alexander tried to make amends, but Catherine's trust had been severely eroded. She went through the motions, allowing him to accompany her to doctor appointments, letting him place a comforting hand on her shoulder, but he could sense the emotional chasm that now divided them. The staff at the mansion tried to maintain a veneer of normalcy, but whispers circulated. Servants exchanged nervous glances. The air felt fraught with unspoken truths and dangerous secrets. For Alexander, guilt was a relentless spectre. He took extended leaves from his work, passing off responsibilities to his junior partners so he could focus on repairing his marriage. But whenever Catherine caught him texting on his phone, her face would darken, consumed by the bitter memory of his betrayal. Sensing her suspicion, Alexander tried to distance himself from anything that might link him back to Anastasia. He blocked her number, deleted their photos, and tried to bury every trace of her existence. But forgetting is often easier said than done. Meanwhile, Anastasia seethed in her small condo across town, nursing the wounds of rejection. She ruminated over every promise Alexander had made, every glance, every caress. Had it all been a lie? Or had Catherine's pregnancy forced him into a corner he couldn't escape? Yet she refused to accept that her relationship with Alexander was truly finished. She told herself that men like him rarely stayed in the straight and narrow for long. All she needed was a moment, a single slip-up, to wedge herself back into his life, or at least to exact some measure of revenge for the heartbreak. On a particularly sleepless night, she scrolled through her phone, pausing at a saved voicemail from Alexander, left weeks ago. His voice was low, seductive, sweet as honey. You're my shining star, Anna. I can't wait to build the life we've been dreaming about. She replayed it several times, tears of rage blurring her vision. Finally, with trembling fingers, she forwarded the voicemail to Catherine's email address, found on the Van Doren Foundation's official website. No note, no explanation, just raw evidence of Alexander's duplicity. Let Catherine decide how to interpret it. When Catherine woke the next morning, she found the voicemail in her inbox. Listening to it felt like ripping open barely healed wounds. She stared at her phone in disbelief, the numbness giving way to anger. Alexander was still asleep beside her, oblivious to her discovery. She wanted to wake him, to scream, to demand why he had ever said those words. But she fought the urge. Instead, she slipped out of bed and walked to the nursery. The pastel walls, the mobile gently spinning over the crib, all reminded her of what was at stake her baby's future. Sighing, she sank into the rocking chair, the phone screen casting a pale glow in the dim morning light. She was tired physically, emotionally, spiritually, tired of feeling powerless. A plan began to form in her mind. If Alexander had indeed ended things, then Anastasia's meddling might be an act of desperation. But if he was lying, Catherine intended to find out. No more half measures. She was determined to lay this entire mess bare, consequences be damned. A new storm system rolled over the coast, lightning slicing the sky in eerie flashes. The thunder echoed like a premonition of chaos yet to come. Catherine decided she couldn't wait any longer. She approached Alexander in his study, face solemn, heart pounding. "We need to talk," she said, her voice devoid of the softness he once loved. The man across from her looked fatigued, but she showed little sympathy. He nodded, shutting his laptop. "What is it, Kath?" She held up her phone, her gaze cold. "Anastasia forwarded me a voicemail. From you." Alexander's face tightened, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Catherine, that's old. Before I decided to fix things with you, I swear. Then why is she sending it now?" Catherine demanded, forcing her rising anger down. "Are you still in contact?" "No," he said firmly. "I told you. I ended it. She won't leave me alone. She's upset." Catherine wanted to believe him, but trust had become a fragile concept in her life. "I'm giving you one chance to prove you're telling the truth," she said. "Meet with Anastasia face to face. Make it clear, once and for all, that she has no place in our lives. That might be the only way she'll stop harassing us." Alexander swallowed hard. He imagined Anastasia's pleading eyes, the swirl of unspoken sorrow between them. But Catherine was right. There was no other way to end this cleanly. "Fine," he said, his voice tinged with resignation. "I'll do it. On one condition, you come with me. Let there be no confusion." Catherine paused. The idea of confronting her husband's mistress again filled her with dread, but perhaps this was the closure they needed. "All right," she agreed quietly. "We'll do it together." That evening, a meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a private lounge in a boutique hotel. Downtown, quiet enough for discreet conversation. Rain hammered against the windows as the trio converged. Anastasia arrived first, nursing a glass of wine at a corner table. Catherine and Alexander appeared moments later, side by side but maintaining a formal distance. Alexander wasted no time. "Anna," he said tightly, "this needs to end. We're done. I'm choosing my family." Anastasia's eyes flickered with wounded pride. She made a visible effort to remain composed, though her voice quivered. "Are you sure, Alex? After everything we shared?" Catherine stiffened, her arms crossed. "He's sure," she cut in, refusing to be intimidated. "We both are." The lounge was nearly empty, their voices resonating with a tense intimacy. Anastasia inhaled sharply, as if grappling with her next words. "Fine," she said, forcing a shrug. "But I didn't come here to beg. I came to warn you. If you think I'm going to disappear quietly, you're mistaken." Lightning illuminated the windows, revealing streaks of rain that smeared the night sky. Catherine's heart hammered. "What are you talking about?" Anastasia leaned forward, her green eyes narrowing. "Alexander promised me more than just sweet words. He made business deals in my name, gave me insider information. It's all documented, Catherine. I could ruin him or your precious Van Doren name if I wanted to." Alexander paled. "Anna, you wouldn't," he whispered, realizing the depth of the betrayal he'd enabled. A bitter smile tugged at Anastasia's lips. "Don't corner a wounded animal, darling. You never know how vicious it might become." The flash of lightning outside was blinding, followed by a crack of thunder so loud it rattled the chandelier overhead. In that moment, all pretense of civility shattered, and Catherine realized that the storms raging within their lives were far from over. The next morning brought a jarring sense of urgency. Catherine woke early, anxiety dancing across her heart. She paced the corridors of the Van Doren mansion, imagining the headlines if Anastasia unleashed her secrets. Alexander's shady dealings might become a public spectacle, and their child would be born into a maelstrom of scandal. She recalled every charity event, every press conference, every philanthropic project that bore the Van Doren name. Reputations could be destroyed in a single headline, but her concerns went beyond image. She feared for Alexander's mental state. Though she resented him for his betrayal, she also recognized that his world had been built on high stakes and risk-taking. If everything came crashing down, would he survive the fall? Meanwhile, Alexander was consumed with damage control. He made frantic calls to his attorneys, his business associates, even calling in favors from local politicians. All the while, he refused to look Catherine in the eye, as if the shame of his affair and the fear of public ruin were more than he could bear. Just when Catherine thought she'd seen the worst, a stern knock sounded at the mansion's front door. A courier arrived with a sealed envelope addressed to Alexander. Inside, they found copies of files implicating him in insider trading and shady property acquisitions documents that bore Anastasia's name in key places. A handwritten note in flamboyant cursive was included. "Decide how this ends, AP." Alexander sank into a leather armchair, burying his face in his hands. "She's not bluffing," he whispered, voice trembling. "I gave her access to some deals. She knows everything." Catherine's mind whirled. She felt a rush of anger, betrayal, and dread. "Why, Alex? Why risk everything we've built?" He looked up at her, hollow-eyed. "Because I thought I was invincible, unstoppable. I got caught up in the thrill of it all. Now it's over." Catherine inhaled sharply, feeling a wave of dizziness. She pressed a hand to her belly, steadying herself. The baby was due any day now, and she realized she needed to protect herself and their child. "We can't let her blackmail us," she said resolutely. "We have to go to the authorities or fight this head-on, or..." The conversation was interrupted by her sudden gasp. A sharp pain rippled through her abdomen, and she doubled over. Alexander rushed to her side, eyes flaring in alarm. "What's wrong? My water broke," Catherine managed between labored breaths. "It's time." Panic surged through Alexander. Everything else, Anastasia, the documents, the scandal, became secondary. He scooped Catherine into his arms, shouting for the driver to bring the car around. Within minutes, they were racing to the hospital. The tension of the mansion left behind, replaced by a new fear that Catherine and the baby might face complications. Yet even as they sped through the rain-slicked streets, one thought pulsed in Catherine's mind. Anastasia's threat still loomed, and nothing, not even the miracle of birth, could fully eclipse the darkness that had infiltrated their lives. She clung to Alexander's hand, uncertain whether this child's birth would bring them together or tear them apart once and for all. The drive to Westbridge Hills Medical Center felt like a fever dream for Catherine. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through her abdomen, and the contractions were coming fast, each wave sharper than the last. Alexander gripped the steering wheel with knuckles turned white, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Their previous worries, Anastasia's blackmail, the precarious business deals, receded in the urgency of impending parenthood. Upon arrival, nurses quickly wheeled Catherine into a private labor suite, and Alexander followed close behind. Alarms beeped softly in the background, the fluorescent lights lending the corridor a harsh brightness that only amplified Catherine's vulnerability. A flurry of medical staff attended her, checking vitals, hooking her up to monitors that tracked the baby's heartbeat. The rhythm was strong, steady, a reassuring sign that even amid this chaos, new life persisted. Alexander hovered at the bedside, stroking Catherine's hair as she breathed through the contractions. Tears shimmered in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, so quietly that she almost didn't hear. "I'm sorry for everything." Catherine looked into his face, searching for sincerity. Despite the pain, she managed a nod, acknowledging at least the sincerity of the moment, if not full forgiveness just yet. "Let's get through this first," she murmured, her voice tight with discomfort. And so began the longest hours of their lives. Each contraction felt like a crescendo, Catherine's breathing ragged as she tried to focus on the coaching from the obstetrician. Alexander offered her ice chips, whispered encouragement, and rubbed her back. In those moments, the memory of Anastasia and the documents receded, replaced by an all-consuming devotion to bringing their child into the world safely. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctor announced it was time for Catherine to push. She summoned every ounce of strength in her body, the pressure building to an almost unbearable peak. Lightning flashed outside the hospital windows, thunder rolling in a dramatic underscore to the miracle and madness of the evening. Alexander held her hand, pressing his forehead against hers, tears running down both their cheeks. One final push, and the room filled with the piercing cry of a newborn. Catherine collapsed back against the pillows, gasping. The world slowed as a nurse carefully wrapped the tiny, squirming infant in a soft blanket, then placed the baby in Catherine's arms. "It's a girl," the nurse announced, smiling warmly. The baby's cries softened as she felt her mother's warmth and her father's trembling hand gently stroking her cheek. In that moment, Catherine and Alexander locked eyes. A silent understanding passed between them, a recognition that, despite the betrayals and lies, they had created something precious. For the first time in months, hope flickered in Catherine's chest, even if it was fragile and overshadowed by the storms awaiting them outside the hospital walls. For a brief time, the world paused. Friends and family, those who hadn't already distanced themselves, sent congratulations. Nurses praised the baby's health. The newborn slept peacefully in a bassinet beside Catherine's bed, and Alexander found himself watching in awe, as if seeing true beauty for the first time. But reality waited, patient and unrelenting. On the second day of Catherine's hospital stay, Alexander stepped out to take a call from his lawyer. It was confirmed. Anastasia had indeed sent copies of incriminating documents to various media outlets, all set to publish unless Alexander met her demands. She wanted a substantial sum of money, enough to set her up for life, and a public apology that admitted no wrongdoing on her part but tarnished his own credibility. Alexander felt the walls closing in. He could pay her off, but it wouldn't end the speculation or the rumors. Worse, it would deplete his liquidity at a critical moment, possibly sabotaging the Charleston development deal. On the other hand, if he refused, he risked being charged with insider trading, an offense that could ruin him financially and legally. His mind reeled as he stared at the sterile hospital corridor, where the faint smell of antiseptic mingled with his own cold sweat. Returning to Catherine's side, he found her resting, the baby swaddled in her arms. He hesitated, torn between burdening her and wanting to share the weight. Guilt gnawed at him. Eventually, he told her everything. Catherine's first reaction was shock, followed swiftly by anger. But as she looked down at her sleeping daughter, a fierce, protective instinct overshadowed all else. "We can't let her destroy this family," she said firmly. "You need to fight back, but do it the right way." Alexander nodded, tears threatening to betray his composure. "I don't know how," he admitted. "The law is on her side if she has proof." Catherine set her jaw. "Then we need to find proof that she manipulated you too. Something that shows she isn't an innocent victim. Doesn't she have any skeletons in her closet?" A spark of possibility flickered in Alexander's eyes. Anastasia had once boasted about bending rules in her art curation business, forging documents to smuggle rare artifacts. Could that be leveraged? He wasn't sure, Still, the notion of exposing Anastasia's wrongdoing carried its own risks and moral dilemmas. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Alexander reached out to an old acquaintance, Daniel Remington, a tech-savvy investor who owed him a favor from their early days in real estate. Daniel was known for keeping hush-hush about grey area tasks, often skirting legal lines to get what he needed. Alexander felt a wave of distaste for resorting to such alliances, but the alternative was ruin. They met in a dimly lit parking garage beneath a high-rise downtown, reminiscent of a scene from a spy thriller. Rain dripped from overhead pipes, creating puddles that reflected the fluorescent glow of flickering lights. "You've really stepped in it this time, haven't you, Van Doren?" Daniel said, leaning against a concrete pillar, arms folded. Alexander exhaled heavily. "I need to protect my family, Dan. I messed up. Help me fix it." With a wry smile, Daniel nodded. "I'll do what I can. Get me her phone number, any email addresses, social media handles, anything. I'll see if there's something we can use to negotiate." Alexander handed over a small piece of paper with Anastasia's details. "Whatever you find, keep it quiet. I don't want to push her into a corner so badly that she lashes out. She's capable of anything right now." Daniel's eyes gleamed. Understood. Back at the mansion, Catherine sat in the nursery, feeding their daughter, whom they had named Elizabeth Grace Van Doren. The baby was a marvel, a tiny bundle of innocence and potential. Every coo and yawn tugged at Catherine's heart, reminding her of the life she wanted to protect, a life free from the shadow of scandal and betrayal. Alexander paced the hallway, phone in hand, awaiting Daniel's call. Eventually, it came. Daniel's voice crackled through the line. "I've found something." Anastasia had some questionable dealings with a private collector overseas. There might be grounds for accusing her of fraud or smuggling. The details are fuzzy, but the mere threat of exposing this might make her back off. Relief coursed through Alexander, though it was tainted by the bitterness of how low he was willing to sink. "All right, draft a statement. Send it to her. Make it clear that if she releases anything about me, I'll release what you found about her. Let's see if she calls our bluff." An uneasy truce settled over the Van Doren household as they waited for Anastasia's response. Days dragged on without any new media reports or blackmail messages. Catherine clung to hope, her focus shifting to Elizabeth's well-being. She began to imagine a future, maybe a smaller house, a calmer life. She'd even considered renting an apartment somewhere far away if the scandal erupted, determined to shield Elizabeth from the fallout. One afternoon, Catherine was in the living room, rocking Elizabeth in her arms while Alexander scrolled nervously through emails. Suddenly his phone buzzed. A message from Anastasia flashed across the screen. "You think you've outsmarted me? I'm not giving up that easily. Let's negotiate." Alexander glanced at Catherine. She nodded, silently urging him to handle the situation carefully. Responding promptly, Alexander typed, "We both have damaging information. Let's end this without mutual destruction. What do you want?" A minute passed, felt like an eternity before Anastasia's next message arrived. A sum of money. Enough to cover damages and lost opportunities. "Once I have it, I disappear. No more threats." Bile rose in Alexander's throat. He typed through gritted teeth, "Where and when?" She shot back a location, a chic cafe in the city, and a time, tomorrow afternoon. Alexander's mind churned. Meeting in public reduced the risk of confrontation, but it also meant there'd be watchful eyes. He'd have to be cautious. Catherine insisted on coming along, but Alexander shook his head. "We can't risk that. If we push her too hard, she might become vindictive again." Reluctantly, Catherine agreed, but she insisted on a safeguard. Alexander would wear a small recording device, courtesy of Daniel's connections, to capture any incriminating admissions. If Anastasia tried to renege or twist the agreement, they'd have tangible evidence to protect themselves. The next day arrived, overcast and drizzling. Alexander parked a few blocks from the cafe, briefcase in hand. Inside the case was a fraction of the money Anastasia demanded, with a promise of the rest to be wired to an account once she confirmed the destruction of all incriminating documents. Daniel lurked in a nearby car, ready to call the police if things went sideways. Alexander's heart hammered as he stepped inside. Anastasia was seated in a corner booth, wearing large sunglasses despite the grey day. She signaled him over, her smile a precarious blend of regret and defiance. "Busy day?" she asked, voice dripping with irony. Alexander ignored the small talk and placed the briefcase on the table. "Here's your partial payment. You'll get the rest when I have proof you've deleted every file and retracted every statement." Anastasia removed her sunglasses, revealing reddened eyes that hinted at sleepless nights. "You really believe I wanted it to come to this, Alexander? I loved you." A pang of something, guilt, pity, flickered across his face. "We both made mistakes, but you went too far, Anna. Blackmail isn't love." She sighed, tears threatening but never quite falling. "I just wanted the life you promised. Everything else was me lashing out." He slid a small flash drive across the table. "This contains evidence of your dealings abroad. Let this serve as a reminder not to cross me again." Her gaze hardened, and for a moment Alexander wondered if she might cause a scene. Instead, she took the flash drive, exhaling sharply. "Fine, I'll wipe the files, retract my leaks. But if you ever breathe a word about my dealings, I'll have my own backup plan. Do we understand each other?" Alexander nodded. The tension between them was suffocating, heavy with the ghosts of what might have been. With trembling hands, Anastasia unzipped the briefcase, checking the cash. Then she stood up, smoothing her coat. "You win, Alex. But trust me, life doesn't always hand out second chances. Whatever problems you had in your marriage, fix them, or you'll end up right back here." She brushed past him, leaving a faint trace of perfume in her wake. Outside, the drizzle had intensified into a steady rain. Alexander watched her disappear into the grey cityscape, a swirl of emotions too tangled to name. Part of him felt relief, another part sadness, and yet another part an unshakable sense of foreboding. Had he truly shut the door on this chapter, or had he merely postponed a worse disaster? Back in Westbridge Hills, Catherine waited anxiously by the fireplace, Elizabeth asleep in her nursery. When Alexander finally returned, drenched from the rain, she saw the exhaustion etched in every line on his face. Without speaking, he sank onto the sofa beside her. The crackling fire cast flickering shadows on the walls, as if echoing the turbulent shadows that still haunted them. "It's done," he said quietly. "She'll back off." Catherine searched his face for reassurance. "And the evidence? She'll destroy it?" He nodded, though not entirely convincingly. "That's what she agreed to." Reaching out, he took her hand, his voice trembling slightly. "Catherine, I know I've hurt you deeply. I know sorry doesn't fix everything, but I want to try, for Elizabeth, for us. I promise you, I'm finished with lies." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting both the pain of betrayal and the flicker of renewed hope. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady. "Then we'll try. We'll go to therapy, rebuild trust one day at a time. But I won't ever go back to how things were, Alexander. Our daughter deserves better than that." He nodded fervently. "She does. We all do." In the weeks that followed, life took on a new texture, cautious, subdued, but not without glimmers of promise. The public scandal never materialized. The media moved on to the next sensation, and Alexander's lawyers quietly settled any lingering legal concerns behind closed doors. The Charleston deal pulled through, albeit at a tighter margin, and Alexander scaled back his ambitions. Realizing he could no longer juggle illusions and deception with the role of husband and father, Catherine found solace in motherhood, bonding with Elizabeth in the nursery she had lovingly designed. She began writing poetry again, using her pen as a means to process the swirl of emotions. Piece by piece, the Van Doren mansion shifted from a battleground of secrets into a haven where forgiveness might just take root. They often reflected on the darkest hours, the forgotten birthday that set everything in motion, the confrontation with Anastasia at the mansion, the heartbreak that almost tore them apart. Yet through sheer tenacity and a baby's gentle laughter, they found the resolve to keep moving forward. A fragile peace had settled over their lives, but they knew it would take endless care to maintain. For Catherine, each dawn was a chance to decide anew whether to trust Alexander, to trust herself, and to trust in the future of their family. For Alexander, every kiss he placed on Elizabeth's forehead reminded him of the responsibility he bore, the vow he'd nearly broken beyond repair. "Let's make this work," Catherine would say, gazing at their daughter curled in her crib. "Yes," Alexander would echo, voice hushed with humility. "Let's make it work." And in that quiet promise, day by day, they chose each other, determined to cling to the precious gift of life that bound them together even after almost losing it all.